So today we're going to be talking to Richmond Stace, who is a specialist pain physiotherapist, which is perhaps a term that one is not generally familiar with, but as someone that I've worked with for maybe a year now, it has been very helpful in my journey towards at least understanding my pain and how I may move forward into a more positive future. Richmond has written a fascinating book called Understand and Overcome Your Chronic Pain, the comprehensive guide to chronic pain and how you can shape a positive future. And I think the emphasis on positive is really interesting here, because one of Richmond's central kind of theories is that one begins to overcome one's pain condition through living one's best life rather than waiting to recover, in inverted commas, before one can live one's best life. So Richmond is a very interesting man, hugely well qualified, and has had a very interesting journey into this world. So what I'd like to do is just welcome Richmond today, and just as an initial introduction, ask him to tell us a little bit about his journey into this world from a professional point of view, and how he ended up being a specialist pain physiotherapist, because I know that he's done a range of disciplines within the kind of within the world of the medical world. So Richmond, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro. I used to say it was a matter of luck as to where I am now, and then someone corrected me on that, saying, "Well, you made various choices," because it's been a long journey. I originally trained as a nurse, and whilst it was fascinating and an amazing exposure to people and life, which I'd never experienced before, and radically transformed the way that I thought about things, not just in terms of healthcare, but in life in general. So it was an incredible experience, taught me huge amounts, met some amazing people. And actually that was when I first was introduced to pain, and I remember spending time with a pain team in the hospital, and we used to run around essentially tweaking people's medication, and that was kind of it. That was kind of all that happened. But at that time I was 18, 19, and so what I saw was basically what I thought would happen, and that's kind of it. So then I thought, well, I don't really want to be a nurse. That's not the career I want to pursue, despite it being an amazing career for other people. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went and did a degree in sport rehabilitation, and that was interesting, and that was all geared to sporty, active people, strength and conditioning, rehabilitation from injuries, that kind of thing. Then I thought, well, I probably need to get a physio degree as well. So I went off and did a physio degree, and that's where I met a guy called Mick Thacker, who radically transformed the way that I think about pain. I remember the lecture, it was at King's, and we were sat in there, and he introduced us to various scientific concepts, but really brought it round to the human being as well, and that was the key thing for me. This is about the person, and I realised that, having done a bit of a full circle from the nursing, which was very much training about being with people and caring for people, then getting all kind of sciencey, and that kind of can take you away from the person, and then coming back round to, no, we've got to see the person first. So that was like, wow, that was brilliant. Mick had set up a master's in pain science and society at King's, and I was like, wow, that's what I need to do. So then when I finished the physio degree, I went and did the master's and spent a couple of years with Mick at King's looking at that. And I've never looked back. That was in the early 2000s. I've done a lot of other stuff since, but essentially built this is the luck bit, I guess, a multidisciplinary background, which now, looking back, I see as an essential part of working with people who are suffering with chronic pain. Build onto that a whole load of different sort of psychological approaches, and it's a wide-ranging toolbox. And that's probably the short version, or short answer to that question.
Why what I'm slightly curious about is why physiotherapist, because in our dealings with each other, they've often been, I would say, more within the world of philosophy and psychology. Do you actually do or engage in much physiotherapeutic work?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting, isn't it? Because physio is it a brand? It's a kind of a it is a discipline, but it's many things because everyone has their own idea of what a physio is and does. Friends will often joke you just kind of give people massages, through to delivering exercises or education. So to me, physio is an amazing profession because you can make it what you will. You take the ticket, you get the basics, you learn everything you can, you immerse yourself in it, which is what I did, perhaps in a slightly obsessive way. And then you can design your way forward from there. So that's always my encouragement to people who want to go into physio is, learn the basics, do them really, really well as you can, and then you can add in the other bits and take it wherever you will. And that's what I did. But there's no one profession for chronic pain. I mean, this is probably one of the big issues. And largely why I came up with the idea 20 years ago or whatever it was of pain coaching, because it's not about one discipline, it's multidisciplinary, and it's not about one profession, although nursing or physio or OT or psychology could become a pain coach and offer it if they had the right kind of background and experience.
Why do you think the existing approaches in terms of the biomedical model and the biopsychosocial model aren't working perhaps as well as they should do? And you've given us a partial answer to that question already. But given that we have, and I'm always astonished by the percentages quoted in terms of those globally suffering from some form of chronic pain condition, that appears to be growing rather than diminishing. There's got to be something that's clearly fundamentally broken or not working within the existing models and approaches. What do you think is missing? What do you think is fundamentally flawed at the heart of the sort of the establishment's thinking in the world of pain management?
I think at the heart of it is move with advances and technology and the biomedical model, which essentially separates mind and body, which is not the reality of someone's situations. You move away from the human being, from the person. It's the person who suffers pain, not the body part or the body system or whatever. So we really need to see the person first. The idea that the body and mind are separate, that's a very old way of thinking. That's hundreds of years old. But you only need to reflect on your own experience to realise that there's just one experience that happens now. Thinking, feeling, perceiving, it all comes together. That's why something like meditation is brilliant, because it helps you to realise that, to see what's actually happening. The fact that you're experiencing your body, you're experiencing the world, and essentially, it's well thought that our body systems are generating those experiences. We don't directly experience our body or the world, we're just experiencing a best guess. Now, the biomedical model really doesn't provide for that. It doesn't offer answers or indeed a way forward for the complexity, the idiosyncratic nature, the dynamic nature of the lived experience of pain or any experience. So if you go and have a scan or an X-ray or have some kind of investigation or test, it may or may not show something, but it can never show pain. You can't see pain, you can't see hunger, thirst, love, any of the experiences that make life what it is, the richness of it. You can't see any of that. It's all felt, and that poses a problem. So someone goes and has a scan, maybe of their back or some other body part, and you might see some signs of an injury or some signs of healing or inflammation, that kind of thing. Now, it's not to ignore the importance of that, but that's not pain. That's just something that you see on a picture that was taken in a particular moment, and of course that is always changing because things are always changing. So you can see nothing on a scan and the person can have a lot of pain. you could see a lot on a scan and that person doesn't have any pain or symptoms. So there's huge variation, and the biomedical model can't explain that. And if you're so hinged on finding something on a picture or a test to explain as a pure explanation of what they're experiencing, it's so easy to go down the wrong path, because they still have the symptoms and they're not actually being focused upon. They're not actually doing anything to transform those experiences. You're just searching for some other explanation. And that just goes on and on and on for many people. Meanwhile, they're not getting better. And the not getting better is one of the reasons that we seem to get stuck. So this kind of mismatch between expecting to get better and the reality I'm not seems to bring some sort of switch in the systems, a reset, if you like. Well, maybe this is it. And so now that sort of generation of that painful experience is happening in more and more situations.
And what about the biopsychosocial model? Because, you know, from my level of understanding, I'm not entirely sure whether or not you've also begun to describe that, or whether it has more layers to it that I don't fully understand.
Yeah, it does, because the biopsychosocial model is incorporating the biology, the physiology, the social aspects and the psychology, and they're all important, but you can still end up in 3 silos there. And it's thought that, you know, clinicians, therapists might well default to the one they're most comfortable with, rather than still seeing the whole person. And so that's going to be a limitation of that particular model. But it's definitely better if it can be worked in a true sense of seeing the person and behind the thinking of what's being done and how you're relating. You know, a lot of the work just seems to be, you know, in the conversations, in the insights, in the moments of clarity that come through those, and through having experiences of movement or activity or reconnecting. You know, these positive moments of change, they're like that. And what we're trying to do in sessions is to punctuate the sessions with those. And you can't say how many there are going to be, but also it's about that person having the skills and the strategies to do that in their world. So they're doing something, they're reconnecting with something that matters, and they go, oh yeah, that worked, and that felt better, that felt good. You know, this is all creating evidence that they can get better. But it encompasses all of those things together. There is a psychology, because they're thinking about things and feeling things, but there's always a bodily aspect to it as well. Everything's embodied. It all happens here, but within a world. So the social context really matters as well. But there's not these strict or firm boundaries. They're much more porous and fluid and flexible than it might appear.
Can you tell me a little bit more about embodied predictive processing? Because I think I was in Bali recently, and I found myself walking down some stairs towards a waterfall which had various healing properties, and my brain immediately defaulted to the previous year, where I'd walked down another set of steep stairs towards yet another kind of healing waterfall when I'd felt some pain. And literally the first step down the stairs to the second waterfall, the pain came on in an instant, and I was reminded of some of our conversations, in that the brain seems to have like an immediate, the subconscious has, say, so hardwired to feel the same sensation, just pretty much like that.
Yeah, so predictive processing is a model that's been applied to pain in more recent years, and seems to be the best model that we have right now. And it speaks of the fact that our body systems that work as an ensemble, so in particular the nervous system, immune system, endocrine system, so a bit like an orchestra, you know, producing or generating music, and together they generate, you know, all of our experiences, including pain. But as a best guess to try and explain, you know, what's going on right now, you know, what would be the best explanation for the sensory information coming in, but very much based on what's happened before. So prior experiences really matter, and particularly, you know, notable. So like pain's notable, isn't it? If you've had pain for X number of months or years on many, many occasions, that's notable, it's emotive, it's impacting. So that's strong evidence. So sometimes it seems that even though right now there might not be much kind of going on, the biology could be quite suggestive that you're largely okay, there might be a few things going on. But if prior experiences of pain in that sort of situation have happened, the systems can kind of go, well, that's what happened before, so that seems to be the best explanation for now. There's no new evidence to suggest anything else. And so you can experience pain. That seems to be the best explanation for your lived world right now. But again, it's embodied. It has to happen in your body. But in a world, in a context, there's always a context. But there can still be nociceptive information flowing in. So that's the kind of information that comes from particular nerve endings that are there to detect threat and danger, possible danger to the integrity of the whole. We can have that kind of thing going on as well. But the relationships between these things, between what's going on biologically and the experience you have, can vary enormously, because that flow of information, that's not the experience. The experience is the prediction, if you like, of what that flow could mean. And that's the difference. That's an important thing for people to understand. And that helps them to understand why it is that things are always changing, why things are different, and also why it is that tests and objective measures may not really relate to what they're experiencing at times.
How does one begin to kind of overcome this sort of the hardwired nature of this sort of predictive processing? If you've had 17 experiences which have resulted in a particular experience, how does one begin to make sure that the 18th and 19th and 20th begin to turn the direction in a more positive, angle?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I notice you use the word hardwired, because is anything hardwired? Neuroplasticity is a term that's bandied around a lot these days, and sometimes it's allied with particular therapies or techniques. What I would say, well, no, it's happening all the time. We're changing all the time. No moment is ever the same. You can't repeat it. So our systems are updating. With pain and other sticky issues as humans, so addiction, depression, anxiety, these kinds of things, it seems that the updates are not happening in the same kind of way. There's this kind of stickiness. There's too much friction, perhaps. But you're still not having the same experience. You can never have the same experience twice. So what we're talking about here is impermanence, which is a Buddhist tenet, and it's exactly that things are always changing, which gives great hope. That kind of thought, if you can start to believe that through self-examination of experiences and doing certain things, and that's some of the work that we would do, you start to realize that maybe it's not quite the same as the story that you're running with. And we all run with stories that are utterly convincing, but of course they're only one version of events. There's a zillion other versions. So commonly, when I first talk to people about their pain, they might say it's the same. It's been the same for months or years or whatever. So they're convinced that it's the same and that it's always there. And that's really interesting. And obviously I tread carefully to begin with until I've developed a rapport. But when the person starts to examine their own experience, they realize actually there's fluctuation, there is change. And there are times when pain is not on the agenda, because we can't have one experience constantly. Because if we have one experience constantly, we'd barely notice anything else. And then some people might say, well, that's kind of how it is for me. So these are really, important conversations that need to be had, so the person can really start to realize what is actually happening. There's a reality, then there's their reality. Or there's a reality and there's my reality. My reality is what I feel, and it's true. I'm not denying what they're saying. I actually need to validate their story. often people's stories haven't been validated. They feel disbelieved. So that's why this is quite a tricky area, but it's actually really important, because your beliefs about your pain and what's happening and the story you're telling are influencing what it actually feels like.
I mean, on that sort of belief front, it's kind of widely held, I suspect. Certainly when I entered this world, I had a very strong belief that if one has chronic pain, one has chronic pain, and there's absolutely bugger all you can do about it. The brain will just continue to focus upon it. You'll strengthen those neural pathways. It's the beast that one feeds. It'll just get worse and worse and worse, and one is doomed. Which obviously is a very depressing prospect. So to what extent do you think one can become, can pain get better? Can one be pain-free, or at least get to a point in one's life whereby pain is 5% of one's life, or 10%, or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that change is, because it's happening all the time, that we can get better. That's the basis of the work. It's the start point. This isn't about managing or coping, although there might be particular moments where you're managing and coping, but in an effort to make life better. Because there's so many ways. If you open up the range of ways that you're measuring getting better in your life, then success is available to you in almost every day, if not every day. So yes, is the short answer to that, and I think that's what we've got to aim for. But there is a problem with that, because the bulk of the thinking is still, I've just got to manage this. This is kind of how it is. It's not going to get any better. Pain management programs classically will focus on that, and will start by saying, we're not here to make your pain better, we're here to help you cope. And I understand the thinking behind it, but I just then think, well, imagine what that must be like to hear that message.
Very depressing.
Yeah, which feeds into what you were saying there about, that story of no hope, I'm doomed, all of those kinds of things, because that becomes your reality. Anything we keep repeating, that's why politicians repeat. It's so convincing, it feels so real. So that's part of the work, when you realise that it doesn't have to be that way. What got you here won't get you there. You can change what you're doing, and there are so many different things that you can do, that you create those new patterns, those new habits, but you have to understand the time factor. This is a journey, there's no quick fixes, this is active work, no one can do it for you. And these are things that people don't necessarily want to hear. It's not popular. I'm the least popular man in the room often. But I feel that we've got to paint it as it is, because that's how you get to the point of acceptance, which is a whole area in itself. And rolling, it's not just a case of, oh right, that's fine. That's something to work on.
And I think that's one of the hardest things that I've had to try and take on board, is the fact that I can't outsource my healing, that I've got to do the work, and that it's not going to be a quick fix. And I'd love you to just unpack the term. It's focus on the process rather than the prize, because again, throughout most of life, one can throw money at a problem and get a quick fix, whereas this situation that I find myself in clearly requires a much more fundamental rethinking of my whole approach to life, who I am, how I meet life and meet my circumstances.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But pain in that way perhaps isn't as unusual as you might immediately think. Use love as another great example of a human experience. You could be asking the same questions about that, about understanding yourself, understanding other people, understanding the world, and how is it you come to love certain things, certain people, and not others, and how some things work out and some things don't. It's up and down. But there is one fundamental truth, and that is there's only this moment. And I think we have a real tendency to drift ahead and to drift back rather than to be present, because this is the only moment you need to handle, this one. And if you're in pain in this moment, then you need to be present in order to handle it. to try and escape from it, to distract, to ignore, that kind of thing. That's fundamentally ignoring your needs. If you were thirsty, would you ignore that? If you were really hungry, would you ignore that? So when you realise that, because people think, this is going to take a long time, or I've had it for a long time, but there's only this moment. You're only ever living this moment. Now, this is a radical shift for a lot of people because we're not used to this way of thinking in our culture. In other cultures, it's quite normal to think in that way, and that is the practice. So we can draw on those practical skills that come from other philosophies and other ways of thinking to essentially ease our own suffering. Life is suffering, but life is also joyous. There's 10,000 joys, 10,000 sorrows. Again, this is very, very Buddhist. But once we realise that life is full of suffering, but we can understand it, there are causes of that suffering, and there are ways to ease that suffering, and there's a path we can follow, then suddenly it all looks quite different. And when you start shifting your understanding of life and pain and health and well-being and self, these kinds of things, straight away your systems are then interpreting sensory information in a different way. Some people say, you just talk about pain to people. Well, no, you do things with your body, but when you're talking about pain, when you're having a conversation with a person, that's when they start realizing things, and they come up with reasons to do things differently themselves. And that's immensely powerful in terms of a moment of positive change. Yeah, I can do that. And someone I was chatting to earlier today, their start point was, I've been diagnosed with this chronic pain, with fibromyalgia. And I said, well, what do you hope to get from, what we're going to do together, our work? And they were very much, just to learn to cope with it. So that was the standard that was set because of the information that they'd had so far. But when you start giving them a new position, or offering a new position, don't have to take it, of course, but offering a new position to get into of, well, actually, why don't you focus on what you want rather than what you don't want? So instead of focusing on the pain and everything around that, why don't you focus on, you want more energy, you want to be doing these things, you want to feel healthier, you want this, that and the other. Focus on what you want, not what you don't want. And that's a skill, because you'll flip between the two. Pain will grab your attention, then it's back to, where am I going? What's the next best step to take? And that very much ties into the process over prize, which a lot of that comes from sport, actually. When you think about teams playing or sports people playing, you've got to be focusing on doing the basics well, consistently. What am I doing now? You can't be focusing on the score. A football team can't go into a game thinking, right, let's win 3-0. Well, that just doesn't happen. Focus on playing your best game, doing the basics well, rehearsing, practicing, and then playing your best game. Now, in this moment, over and over. And the prize takes care of itself, because we have no control over outcomes or results, and that's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but they just appear, they just happen as a matter of what you're doing consistently, your habits, your patterns. So that's the bit to focus on, creating the conditions consistently so that it makes it most likely that the outcomes that you get are the ones that you want or close to. But when we're really caught up on, I want this, I want that, that's a great cause of suffering.
And I guess the outcomes that one is looking for, or the aims and ambitions, may very well not be related to the body and physicality. It may well be that I would love to become a successful concert pianist, or, sorry, that's a ludicrous example, but that some sort of higher order, some ambition that one might have.
It could be that, it could be playing with the kids, it could be going back to work, it could simply be, I want to get out of this bedroom because I've been lying in bed for months. Everyone has their own needs, and our job as clinicians or as a pain coach is to absolutely meet that person where they are on their journey, not try and shovel them down some pre-existing route. Oh, you've got this, therefore you do that. No. What are your needs? What do you want to achieve? And then you can look at practically the steps to take to work in that direction. And there's no guarantees of any outcomes. but you're much more likely to get better outcomes if you're on your path. And you're on your path because you have a practice, and your practice consists of the skills and strategies that you're using consistently day in, day out.
So typically when someone enters your clinic for the first time, it's very much a debate about their understanding of. My understanding is, I certainly think back to the first time I met you. You asked me very clearly to say, "What's your understanding of pain?" And I think you were using that to just get a sort of a handle on where I was coming from, and I think I might have got 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10, and which perhaps was not too bad, but was some way off beam. But very quickly you started to ask me questions about, well, you know, what is it you'd like to be? What is it like you'd like to achieve? What would you like an outcome to be? What would you like to focus upon, etc., etc. And that's quite refreshing, rather than just trying to banish pain, because it's obviously much more complex than that.
Yeah, clarifying for me and for the person and for you in that situation, where you are, what are your beliefs? What do you think is happening here? You've seen a lot of people, you've heard a lot of things, you read stuff. What do you think? What do you tell your friends when they ask? You've still got this pain. What's happening? And then things like expectations. What are your expectations? What do you want to work on? What really matters to you in your life? Because that position and what matters, we're looking to sync all these things up in the practical stuff that we do, in the strategies that we design for you, to take those small steps forward. And it is small steps, and it needs to be small steps, but that doesn't mean it has to take a long time to start feeling that you're on the right path, or indeed feeling successes. And one of my encouragements to people is always to, in amongst other measures that you might have, is to measure your success by the fact that you've given it your best shot in that moment, because no matter what someone's doing, they're doing it the best way they can. It's easy to look at someone else and go, oh, they're not really trying, or they've done the wrong thing, or whatever. But that's not true. They are always doing their best with what they have in that moment, what occurs to them. It's always easy afterwards to think, oh, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I say that? Or whatever. That's always easy in hindsight, but at that moment they're doing their best. And we're looking to build on that, the fact that someone is there and they've turned up to an appointment, and that's what you can build on.
In your book you list a huge range of practices and tools that can be helpful on one's journey towards getting better. And I don't, obviously, Richmond, expect you to go through all 40 of them and give me a full 360 degree perspective on the world of mindfulness or movement or pacing or acceptance or whatever. But perhaps you could talk to me a little bit about some of the key themes there, some of the key practices that most people find to be helpful in their journey forward.
Yeah, as you said, there's a lot there, and that's probably a fraction. But I didn't want the book to be too overwhelming. I mean, it's packed with information and insights from start to finish. But yeah, I tend to think and describe in themes, and then we'll choose practices and strategies. Movement is obviously an important one, because there's not a lot we can achieve without movement. But often people have a fear of movement, or they're worried about moving. So, again, the start point is always the understanding of pain, to realise that actually your body needs movement, but there's ways of doing it. So, for example, working within your window of tolerance, really, really matters. And you don't have to be progressing every day. People think, oh, week 1 I've got to do this, and week 2 I've got to do that. No. Meet yourself where you are and make the best decision about how much to do and what to do each time you're about to practice. Now, layered on top of that would be something like a mindful practice, because that helps you to be present so that you can make those decisions more clearly. So that's an important practice. but maybe not for everyone, or maybe we'll call it something else. Some people, not so comfortable with the idea of mindfulness or meditation. So it could be more focused attention training, or using the breath, for example, to be present, or some other kind of anchoring technique of feeling your feet on the floor and connecting with your body, which is important. And again, connecting with the body can be difficult for some people, because that's the source of, or feels very much like the source of their suffering. So why would I want to connect with my body? It hurts. But we need to, in order to transform the experience in how we're relating. And how we relate to things really, really matters. This is a key insight. It's not so much what's happening, it's how you relate to it that matters, because what's happening is happening. We have no control over that. Life just appears for us, which is amazing when you think about it. But how you relate and how you respond, that's the skill. That's the skill. The way that I think about what's happening and what I can do in a resourceful way. And if, say, there's only one or two things I can do, well, that's what I would do. If I can't control what's happening, like the weather, then there's no point worrying about it, although we do as humans. And we often spend time trying to control things we can't, or spend time in the future or the past, as I was saying before, neither of which exists. So we need to be present, and that can be difficult and scary, because we just don't practice that kind of thing routinely in our culture. So, there's some of the, I guess, more specific things that would fit into themes of day-to-day living. And the big bulk of our time is living, going about our business. So this is maybe you get up at 7 and go to bed at 11, for example, although some people I work with are up for 20 hours a day. So how do you do that? How do you look after yourself? How do you make good decisions about what to do, how much, when to break, which practices to use? You need that. That's the big bulk of the work. Then you've got specific exercises you might do, around body sense or movement or mobility, that kind of thing. And they kind of punctuate the day. Then you've got skills of being well, which is all about promoting your own wellness and focusing on that direction that you want to go on. You can't do that particularly well if you're not working on your skills of being well, which again tie into movement and breathing and diet and sleep and how you think and how you relate to others. And all of those have sort of subcategories in terms of skills and practices as well. So there's a huge amount, but they're some of the biggest themes, along with skills to deal with the tricky moments, because there's always going to be tricky moments. You're kind of surfing the waves, and you need to be able to relate to the moments when you feel pain or feel worried or both, or other difficult times. Well, what can I do here? What can I do? And you get better at them because they're skills. So it's like learning the violin or the piano or a language to start with. It's all a bit tricky and you have to think about it, but gradually you get better, and then you're surfing those waves better.
Great, that was amazing, really coherent slug of video content there, Richmond. Brilliant. Could you actually just say a little bit more about routines, because from a personal perspective it's something that I'm absolutely hopeless at beginning to establish, is a morning routine, an evening routine, in fact a daytime routine, and structure seems to be an important theme that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, a structure. So, periodizing your day, but then prioritizing and planning. So those 3 Ps. Yeah, it's funny. Some people say, "Oh, I don't like routine." It's almost like they're being told what to do. But we all have routines. We all kind of get up in a sort of the same sort of way. Most days we probably follow a similar kind of routine. But it's trying to find one that's going to work to get you into the best state. And that's why I encourage a morning routine. Mornings are often tricky. You wake up, you feel groggy, maybe pain, stiffness. It's all a bit difficult. Maybe your mood's low, that sort of thing. All understandable. And there's a biology that underpins that as well, which we can understand. But essentially, you don't want to stay in that state. You want to lift your state. You want to get into a better state, a good or great state. So you might use some breathing to change your physiology and how you're feeling, and then some movement to get your body going, to nourish the tissues, which also feeds into how you're feeling. You know, the body state is playing a big role in the kinds of things you think and the kinds of decisions that you make. Remember, there's no separation there. And then finally, sort of setting an intent for the day. You know, what's going to be your style? Have some kind of mantra. I'll do it the best way I can. I'm going to work on these things. I'm going to use the 1% rule. You know, whatever it is that just gives you that little boost, that little lift. And it doesn't have to be a huge one. I mean, great if it is. But it's being acceptant of these are small steps. These are things that you do and they accumulate over time. So this is why you need to be consistent. You're talking about habit formation, and there are particular ways of forming habits that seem to work better. So for example, setting the bar low, having the right kind of intent, lining it up with your values to making it important, noting down your successes. You know, these kinds of things can really help to form, you know, the habits that create the conditions for you to get better. You know, it's a bit like looking after a garden. You know, you consistently do things to let things flourish. That's really what we're trying to do with our whole selves, following this path of heading towards the types of things that we might want to do and gradually doing them.
Just a few kind of specific questions from me, and these are largely rooted in my own particular struggles. Is how to cultivate a mindfulness practice when one is in pain, and every fibre of one's body is screaming resistance, go away, when will it get better? Is it driven by everything that's happened to me in the past? You know, absolutely, it's the complete antithesis of living in the present moment. Is it just down to practice?
Yeah, and it's committing to it. And you know, mindfulness meditation is a way of being. You're not doing it to achieve anything, which is sort of an odd way to think about things, again, in our culture, because we do things for a reason. Although, you know, perhaps if someone was to say, well, you know, I'm doing this to learn about myself, the leanings of my mind, to get a better grip on what's really happening, then, you know, that's a good reason, I suppose. But the fundamental problem is, as soon as we're doing something to get the thing, we're then not focusing on what we're doing. And you know, it's all about being present and noticing what's happening. But then your mind will wander, because it does, and it's starting again. And part of the practice is to start again, just like we do each moment. You know, there's the birth of a moment, the death of a moment, the birth of a moment, and so on and so forth. And so we're tapping into the natural rhythms and experiences that we're having. And that examination reveals things. But it can be really uncomfortable. So there are a few things that are important. You know, one is that, you know, a meditation or mindful practice needs to be part of a broader range of things you're doing to look after yourself. So sleep and diet and exercise, all of that stuff needs to be happening. The person needs to be going into it, you know, understanding that it's not about relaxing or being calm or even easing one's pain, although all of those things can happen off the back of the practice. They need to go into it, you know, eyes wide open, and also be able to realize when they're moving out of their window of tolerance. So you know, you could be sat there, and if it's getting really painful, it'd be nigh on impossible to practice. So, you know, you would break at that point. So just like with movements and exercise and other things that you're doing, working within the window of tolerance is really, really important. So you might do that work together with someone first of all, just so that you get a grip of it, and then you're practicing in your own world.
What's your take on sort of cultivating a sense of safety and overcoming fear? Because I know that I spend a lot of my kind of waking hours being extremely fearful of what might be happening to me, fearful about whether or not there's going to be an escape, Is that essentially just back to one's mindfulness practice, that is essentially fundamentally just anxiety ruling the roost?
Yeah, I mean, just like pain can be very, very domineering, so can feelings of fear and anxiety. I think it's always important to remember that these are normal human feelings, normal human emotions, but you know, is it something that's impacting here? Is this something that you know, is too domineering in my experience and controlling perhaps what, you know, the types of decisions that you're making? And whilst, you know, one can have a fear of pain, often the understanding of the person's pain, so not pain in general, their own experiences or your own experience, that can often allay a lot of the fears. And then as they start approaching the types of things they want to do, they're filling their time more and more with that. So there's less room for the pain to rent or the fear of pain to rent. And then you're learning various skills to see the fear for what it is and to work with that. So that can be really helpful for a lot of people. But if it's detected that there's some sort of deep-seated fear, you know, maybe from some kind of trauma from the past that's yet to be resolved or processed, then there might be some other work, some deeper work to be done there. So say, you know, there might be elements of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And these are the kinds of things that you would try and, you know, establish when you're having those first conversations. And it's important to understand someone's past. People like to tell you what's happening now, and that really matters. But sometimes the story goes way back beyond the time that they think, and we're on a timeline. So every experience we have, most of which we won't remember, of course, matters because we are where we are, shaped by all of those things.
What's your take on depression and how one might deal with a sort of depressive condition in terms of living one's best life when actually every fibre of one's body wants to just lurk away in bed? When I know it's a very difficult question, but I suppose one just needs to chip away at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say treat people with depression per se, so people generally don't come to me because they're suffering with depression, but it's pretty common as part of that bag of causes of suffering. But there are reasons why a person feels depressed. And it's a lived experience like pain, but there's an underlying biology that we know about as well, largely inflammatory. So I think, again, it's important for the person to understand their lived experience, for it to be acknowledged, and for it to be explained. You know, when you're in a depressed state, your body systems essentially go into an energy-saving mode. And what that means is that the things that would typically lift you, they're the last things you want to do. You know, your body systems are trying to conserve that energy. So being with other people, you know, uses energy. Movement, exercise uses energy. Learning uses energy. But they're the three things that can help. So it's finding ways of doing it, and it's getting the right level as a start point. And it's realizing that, you know, you're not going to necessarily suddenly feel different by engaging or reconnecting with those things. But the blend of understanding with creating some new patterns bit by bit can certainly help a lot of people. You know, obviously there can be a role for medication, but people need more than just pills, because just like with pain, you know, there are circumstances, it's complex, it's idiosyncratic, it's ever changing. And often it's really about reconnecting with things that matter, so people, purpose, planet, the body, that can help. Although, as I said, some people might need medication to help them on their way.
And what about pain meds specifically? Are you an advocate of those, or on a kind of case-by-case basis?
Yeah, medication is a personal choice at the end of the day. Some people choose not to use pain medication. They'd rather not. Obviously, there's an array of different drugs that work in different ways, from, you could say, the low level paracetamols up to the big hitting ones, the ketamines, where you would go and have an infusion, and everything else in between. Although I wouldn't necessarily think of them in that kind of layered way. It's about finding what's right for that person, informing them of the pluses and the minuses, and then helping them to come to a decision about what the best thing to do. So I'm not anti-medication, but I'm pro using it wisely, it being monitored very carefully, and realising that pills don't teach you how to live. So whilst they can be helpful, that's not what's going to transform your life. You are in what you're thinking and doing.